multicultural writing. We have been yesterday we did what was aboriginal writing. Okay, how did natives write and what was the politics involved in their aboriginal literature in the native writings. Today we'll see the multicultural writings. Okay, so what is this multicultural? What does it mean? I'll explain that to you first, and then we'll go over to literature, and then how novel is written by these by people from these different cultures. Yeah. So somehow it got disconnected. Now learners, what I was saying is that how these people from multicultural background. So in an easy word, we can say multi means various from different, and culture means the culture that different cultures that they belong from. So these people belonging to different cultures, or you may say the immigrants in the domain of Australia, how they are writing, what they are writing, that we are going to see. So, if you see from the past, I think 5, 6, or 7 days, we have been discussing three major aspects of Australian national identity that comprises of the indigenous people, the settlers, okay, and also they had a multicultural past. Okay, so we did a lot of indigenous work. Okay, we now we will see the work of people from the multicultural aspect. Okay, so although we see a lot of aboriginal writings, how these people claim their identities, but you must also remember that people from multicultural background also, they also have their beautiful part of Australian writings, and they represent diverse elements within modern Australian society. So this multicultural aspect, it is very much new. Okay, or you may say it is mainly post-colonial. Okay, this idea is mainly post-colonial. So you will see how these people are writing in the contemporary perspective that we are going to. Okay, Shirin, just mute yourself, mute your phone, your device. Thank you. Now we'll see what are these multicultural writings first. Okay. Now these multicultural writings, they apply to the people with multicultural perspectives. So it discusses multiculturalism with respect to the changing political scenario in Australia. Okay, and also it focuses on the major characteristics of multi Australian multicultural writing. Okay, so for us, if you narrow down multiculturalism, then you can say that which deals with the different varying political scenario, political conditions in Australia, and what these multicultural people from very different cultures, how they are representing their literature, that we shall see under multicultural writings. Okay, so we see that these multicultural novelists, those who came, they came in two waves. Okay, two waves in the Australian literary domain. Uh, they had the first of all these multicultural writers. They had the engagements with Asia, especially South Asia in the contemporary period, which means diaspora. Okay, Asia and South Asian diaspora, and these writer when they came from different nations of South Asia, and when they settled in Australia, and when they wrote about their roots, okay, so that becomes South Asian diaspora. Okay, Then you can see a writer here. You have this now. I'll be dealing with this in detail with you. Yasmin Gunaratne. Okay, she's a novelist, and we shall see in detail her novel, A Change of Skies. Okay, so A Change of Skies, novel by Gunaratne. She introduces life and work of Sri Lankan Australian. Okay, so this comprises of Sri Lankan diaspora. So she writes about the life of Sri Lankan people in Australia, from the from the perspective of Sri Lankan person. So the plot of her novel, A Change of Skies, discusses the themes of the novel such as colonialism and post-colonialism. She talks about the history, immigration, how what involves immigration, and she talks about when she comes to Australia, what kind of cultural encounters does she face. Okay, and she talks about identity and belongingness in her novel. Okay, and very broadly we shall see in the in the coming lines, and we'll see that this particular novel, A Change of Skies, which was published in 1991, it needs a close scrutiny because its central theme talks about the clash of cultures. It talks about changes, okay, when you're adapting different country, and it's all about adapting to different cultural environment. Okay, so the A Change of Skies is a tragic comic method she has used in the story narration method, and she has used a lot of irony and humor, which is the kind of irony and humor is typically used in post-colonial perspective. She has made a good use of these techniques, and then the significance of the title and theme is based on Australian nations and the identity of a Sri Lankan person, Sri Lankan woman in the Australian domain, that we shall see in in a very broad way. I'll discuss with you later. But first, let me give you a broad idea of what do you mean by multiculturalism, because in this paper we have to exquisitely deal with multicultural nation that Australia has become because of so much of influx of settlers from different parts of the world. So it has become a melting pot of different cultures. Okay, so how this happened and what are the politics involved is in this, that we are going to discuss. So here you can see that multicultural means multi-tiered, multi-level of study. Okay, and in this multicultural aspect about multicultural encounters in Australia, a lot of research, lot of publication has been done. Okay, and that makes the whole issue very complicated and complex, and there's often debate, okay, that goes on the fundamental issues of identity. Okay, and it talks about the social organization of the nation. Okay, and there's a lot of debate about the people involved in the personal level. Okay, so why there's a debate, we'll see that, because you will find here that multiculturalism here in Australia, particularly, it is a situation, okay, where all different cultural or racial groups in a society, they have been given equal rights and opportunities. Okay, and no culture is disregarded. Okay, every culture is respected in its own way. Okay, so here you will see that multiculturalism, actually means, and that has been governed by the public of that country, that it is managed through cultural diversity. Okay, and it is attempt by every people of every cultural background to protect each other's cultural diversity, not only to protect but to respect each other's cultural diversity. Okay, so you can say more or less, when we believe in equality, equality in diversity, then we have to you know um give that aspect may also be called as a plural society. Okay, a plural society which is subjected to the inclusion of people of any ethnic group, people of any racial group. Okay, so here what happens, you can see, yesterday we were dealing with indigenous people and their encounter with the settlers, or you can say more or less colonizers. Okay, so these colonizers, in the name of settling there, in the name of bringing development to the Australian Aboriginal people, they started exploiting them. They started being violent with them. They started annexing their land and property. Okay, but on the other hand, if you see people who came later, who moved later as immigrants, those many were, I was telling in my earlier classes, many were sent to Australia. Convicts were also sent to Australia, okay, by the British imperial power. So they settled. These people, these different settlers, they never disturbed the peace of Aboriginal people. Okay, they just came and settled. So here you can see that this whole comprises of multicultural milieu. So please remember that these aboriginal tribes, historically it is said that some 60,000 years back, these people came from some continents of Asia and they settled here in Australia. Okay, these were the aboriginal people, the earliest people to come to the domains of Australia. Then next batch of people were the colonizers, who came, who colonized, and they settled. See, another culture coming. Okay, there's an encounter with another culture. Then what happened when British imperialism spread, and what they did, they started to send in some convicts also as a way of punishment to this remote land of Australia. So another culture came. Mm. Then people started migrating also from different parts of Europe in order to settle there. Okay, and to some extent, some people came from the US also. People came from South Asian domain as well. So see, so many people from different ethnic backgrounds, they came to this place, and all of them settled here gradually. All right. So this is how the multiculturalism took its shape and form in Australia. Okay. So you can say that Australian government, but um, Aboriginal people and these people from other ethnic background, they have a proper distinction. Okay, they don't get assimilated. They have got proper distinction, and the literature also, in the literature they define it properly, exactly what is, where do they stand. Okay, so in literature they give their stand very prominently, very legibly. Okay, so if you see, if you compare Australia with Canada, you will find Canada has got a permanent department of multiculturalism and citizenship. Okay, so they have a department. Government has entrusted this whole issue of multiculturalism in the form of a department. Okay, so they have a department of multiculturalism and citizenship, and a multicultural act is also there in Canada. But Australia has just one office. Okay, Office of Multicultural Affairs, and there is no act. Okay, there is no multicultural act in Australia. They just have an agenda. Okay, they just have an issue called multiculturalism, but they do not, neither do they have any act, nor government. Government has any special special part of their constitution for multicultural people. Okay, so you can see that overall, in Australia, Australia is a melting pot of different cultures. They came and they just amalgamated here in Australia. Okay, so you can see very diverse and very rich variety of people from different cultural, ethnic, linguistic, and religious backgrounds. Okay, so uh, many policies are coming up. Okay, immigration policies are coming up since after 1945. Okay, many policies are coming up for them, for the immigrants. But today you can, at present in the contemporary time, you can clearly see many different cultures, they get together. Okay, and they form Australia. So when although when colonizers came and they tortured aboriginal people, then aboriginal people resisted. But when other settlers came and when they settled peacefully, aboriginal people had no problem with them. Okay, they had no issues with them. Like, why are you coming in our country? Why are you settling them? Okay, there's no feeling of insecurity on the part of the aboriginal people. So time and again, people have been moving. People have been shifting to call Australia their home, and with different cultures, they live peacefully in the continent. Okay, so you can see that Australia, in that sense, you will find it is a very peculiar country. Okay, where there is they always embrace dualism. Two types of two different uh, poles also exist there peacefully. Like Protestant and Catholic, they live peacefully. Settlers and Aborigines are also there. Okay, and British, mainly British and Australians are also there. Okay, so in this aspect, you can say multiculturalism. It is defined as that aspect which has several different cultures. Okay, and which can be brought together to live peacefully and equally as one continent, as a one country continent. Okay, so this is how different cultures they mixed up, and this is how we can call it today multicultural country, where people from different various ethnic group they live peacefully. So multiculturalism is one of the most significant and also controversial political ideology to influence Australian public life. Okay, today multiculturalism is a kind of philosophy in the domain of Australia, and it addresses the long term reality that Australia is a land whose people are derived from many cultures. Okay, so they are old peoples also, people like aboriginal people, they are recent people also, like the diasporic people who are going from many countries and settling there. So overall, these Australian people, they have respect for these many cultures. They give full freedom to have their own cultural practices. Okay, they give equal. They believe in giving equality of opportunity, and they want to equally use the best human resources that is represented through diversity. So this is a rich philosophy that Australia follows, and you can also call this diversity as cultural pluralism or cultural diversity. Okay, that is what is enjoyed in Australia. All right. So we have seen that if we go a little back, when I was teaching you in my initial classes of this Australian novel, then I was talking about their nationalistic feeling, the feeling of the rootedness for their country, for their nation. So this kind of idea escalated in the 1920s. Okay, this feeling of Australian identity that has to be represented in literature. So Australia became largely, in those days it was largely monocultural, singular culture. White Australians are British. There were Irish original people also, those who were prominently present at that time. Okay, and other minorities were also there, like aboriginal people. Many Chinese settlers were also there. Okay, Germans were also there, but they believe that all of them comprises of one culture, and they should go to any extent to protect their land, and they had a sense of pride for their land. So the most intense period which defines this nationalism was between 1880s and the 1940s. Okay, that had during which period we had this implementation of white Australia policy. Okay, and the establishment of Australian Labor Party was also done during this time. So what is this white Australia policy? White Australia policy, it talks about different historical policies that effectively stopped that effectively barred people of non-European descent from immigrating to Australia. So in this kind of act, they passed one act and they said that those who were non-European, they are not allowed to immigrate to Australia. So Europeans again formed their domination in Australian continent. So Australian government never propagated any specific policy title like this, but the term was invented later. Okay, and they aimed to exclude people from Asia or from the Pacific Islands. Okay, so in the early 1940s and 50s, most Australian uh, people resisted against this policy because there was no equality in this policy. If you're European, you can come here. If you're not European, you should not come here. So many Australians, they resisted this kind of policy, okay, which did not allow not non-British people in the country. So the official policy of assimilation was in part motivated by a desire to overcome opposition. Okay, and they had ambitious and large immigration intake from wide variety of sources. Okay, so this kind of only European migration was discarded later. So since 1947, Australian national identity, it centers around two opposite objectives. First, first it talks about Australian national identity. It centers around preservation of the uh, uniform identity. You should be, if you have come to Australia, if you wish to settle here, you are an Australian. So they maintained one uniform identity. Okay, and they replaced this name. Okay, so Australian was called as multicultural country. Okay, where they did not require any homogeneous or certain exact ethnic values. They accepted diversity of cultural values. Okay, so this kind of non-immigration, non-European should not migrate. This was not encouraged. Okay, so they want to preserve one uniform identity. Secondly, they encouraged this multicultural identity as well. Okay, so this first policy to maintain uniform identity was for the natives of Australian, and when they embraced multicultural identity, that was specifically meant for the people who were settling here, those who were immigrating here in Australia. So they embraced people from all cultural and ethnic background. Okay, so here multiculturalism in Australian domain, it is mainly a political discourse to describe certain sets of ideas at the end of 1960s. By 1960s they had formed certain set of ideas. Okay, and when they spoke about these different culture, the different sets of ideas about multiculturalism, then that entitles Australia as a multicultural nation. So if you see, in this line, if you think, then multiculturalism in Australia becomes, a kind of demographic and sociological factor. Okay, demographic means which belongs to the population, the different cultures of population. Okay, and also it talks about certain sociological facts because their cultures are all different. The societies and the way of life is all different because there are so many cultures. So Australia is an ethnically and culturally diverse multilingual society. Multilingual means, like, if you see Britain, if you see England, that is that it has got only one one monolingual, just English they speak. Okay, when you speak in different languages, then that becomes multilingual society. So it is also used to denote some ideological concept about the way Australian society is organized. Okay, so in this context, you can say that multiculturalism sometimes uh, talks about assimilation, means getting mixed up there with their culture, with Australian culture, and also also denotes integration. Okay, means you're assimilated and you're integrated. You feel like one with them. Okay, with them means with the host nation. So assimilation and integration, they refer to some ideologies in the multicultural aspect. Okay, that happened, that gradually took place in the Australian domain. So multiculturalism is for all Australians. Okay, multiculturalism is about mainstream Australia, because mainstream Australia is multicultural. So the immigration has influenced Australian society in different ways. Australia experiences a it records a lot of migration to their place. Okay, so they have got a record breaking migration. People from all over the world, they come and they prefer to settle there. So along with essential provision for livelihood like food, housing, migrants, they set up new businesses, they help businesses to expand, they helped in investment policies, and they had these migrants, they had a lot of contribution with regard to the development of technology. They helped in the production of extra food and services. Okay, and they helped both private and government sectors. Okay, so which is why government embraced multiculturalism, because people from different cultures, they came, and along with that, they brought in their cultural richness and vividity. Okay, so multiculturalism in Australia, it emerged in the context of various international and domestic trends. Okay, they brought different social, political, intellectual, academic, and ideological prospects to the nation, so that directly or indirectly influenced the nation to develop. So you can say in a way that this multicultural influx, it brought a lot of development to the people of Australia. Okay, so they helped in developing the nation. Now we'll go over to writing, how the writing formed, and how multiculturalism also became beneficial for the Australian development that we are going to see. So if you see multicultural literature, so if you see literature in the domains of Australia, you will see that they have initially, they had a lot of literature on nationalistic ideology. Okay, and they usually talked about Australian literature's formal characteristics. They had a proper pattern of meanings, they have proper social and political concerns represented in their writings. Okay, so but if you see in the in the present context, if you see in the contemporary context, then then earlier, like, it had some ideal concerns. Now if you see in the contemporary writing, you see that there is no singular ideal. Okay, because the domain of literature also has become multicultural. Okay, so they don't have any fixed norm or ideal or way or method. Now they have become diverse. So under these circumstances, the development of official policy of multiculturalism was was a blessing for the literary people. Okay, so when literary theory and government policy, they appear to have been more or less in step, means together, they are parallel, means when government policy and when literary theory, when they run parallel, okay, then it offers a new way of thinking about nationalism that involve dealing with the articulation of differences rather than similarities. So which means when policy is reciprocated in literature, then it says that then there is certain benefit for the literary people and for the citizen as well. So for example, nationalism, government had its policies about nationalism. In the same way, literary people also had developed theories on nationalism and nationalistic feelings. Okay, so this became very helpful, helpful for the literary people, for the common citizen to think and work upon this equal nationalist feelings. Okay, so the work of developing theory of multiculturalism, it had a little problem. Okay, so for that was when multicultural writing was coming from non-English speaking people. Okay, that brought a little bit of imbalance in their literary production. So this work had a professional objective. Those who, that non-English speaking people, they wrote with some objective, but it also offered, a critique of prevailing notions about national character. They gave new critique. They opened new frontiers to analyze, to think about the national character. Okay, they talked about the place of diversity within national culture. So this again, brought a diversity, a change, a shift, a paradigmatic shift in the perspectives of contemporary literary production. Okay, so when you say that no, national identity is homogeneous, means for me national identity may be something else. For you it might be something else. Okay, suppose for me, uh, Puri temple in Odisha is a symbol of national identity for me. For you, Taj Mahal can be a form of national identity. So it varies from your thinking to my thinking. Similarly, for them also, the national identity varied, because they were multicultural people. The way aboriginal people thought, British did not think. The way new settlers thought, those people, those natives did not think in the same way. So they had varied perspectives on this nationalistic, uh, nationalistic, what do you say, ideology theory. So emerging out of Commonwealth literature, new literatures in English, you can say post colonial literary studies, they exercised a properly settled strategic influence by attributing progressive political and cultural potential, okay, to the national literature in post colonial country. So, when post colonial literature came into existence, the world saw how varied can be one's perspective, can be the perspectives in literature. Okay, post colonial literature brought fresh ideas about the what is the center, what is the periphery. Post colonial literature questioned, okay, questioned what is center and what is periphery. So again, this whole idea was changed when post colonial literature arrived in the domain of Australia. So there are cultures which are deeply and fundamentally divided. Okay, and in this tradition, you know, uh, in this diverse arena of cultures, tradition prospers. Okay, and tradition continues through the construction of national identity. Okay, and this varied idea of national identity has to be accepted, because of the hybrid nature of cultural purity. So hybridity came, different cultures settled, different perspectives arose with respect to the idea of national identity. Post colonial literature again questioned what is national identity. So this brought in new ideas where each person of each cultural group believed in preserving one's tradition, preserving one's culture, preserving one's idea of nationhood. Okay, so here the nation is not produced through bringing or cleaning of differences. Rather, nation constituted through differences. Okay, so differences is celebrated as different identity in the post-colonial context. So in this case, nature of multicultural writing and its relationship with the type of writing Australian literature was practicing, they have become important issues of discussion presently. So the issue of multiculturalism in Australia, it has got a lot of controversy. It is controversial. Okay, and both, critics are divided into split into halves, and there's tension which is captured and reflected in the reception of the strong but constantly evolving tradition of Australian multicultural writing. So the multicultural writing is strongly evolving. Okay, and strong debates are also going on in the present case, about who can speak for whom. Okay, who is going to speak for whom? Is the Aboriginal going to speak for the new settler, or the new settler, or the British is going to speak about Aborigine? So who is going to speak for whom? So it claims of the appropriation and commodification of multicultural writing. The commodity, so multicultural writing, is a kind of commodity. Okay, it is a commodity by publishers. Okay, it's a writing commodity by publishers and academia, and also its relationship to the domain of Australian literature, which can work to challenge the mythology of Australian literary canon. Okay, so who is going to address Australian literary canon? Okay, who is going to, to define this canon in terms of, literary, mm, in a literary domain? Who is going to say? Who is going to talk about the core culture, and if the core culture is to be spoken about, and the rest of the marginal, stories are just add-ons. So what to do? There's a debate. Who is the center, who is the periphery, who is going to write for whom? So presently this debate is going on with regard to the politics of Australian multicultural writing. Okay, so multicultural writing is only one of a number of different terms used to designate writing by Australians, by backgrounds other than English and Irish mainstream. So others when they are writing, non-English speaking people when they are writing. Okay, about about Australia, those migrant, those who are not Anglo people. Okay, those who are writing from different ethnic groups, those who are non-English speaking people. Okay, those who are ethnic minority. So who is going to speak about them? That became an important issue in the contemporary times. So here it should be noted that most Aboriginal writers preferred not to be included in this category. Aboriginal people said that we are the original people. We are not, don't add us in this multicultural domain. These are all immigrants. They have come from different countries. They have settled here. We have not settled here. So Aboriginal writing, they consider themselves to be different from these writings. Okay, they do not want themselves to get added in the multicultural writing. So they argue that that it has got immigrant issues. We are not immigrants. Okay, and they do not recognize their special status as indigenous culture. They are the aboriginal inhabitants of the land. So they say that we are the original inhabitants of the land. Okay, we have the special, we enjoy the special status. So please don't equate us with the multicultural domain. We are not one among them. We are distinguished. We are different. So aboriginal writing is different and contrary from the Australian writings. So if you see multicultural writing, it is very much new in Australia. Okay, for the past 40, 50 years only they are writing. Multicultural writing has come into existence, and the growth of published ethnic literature has accelerated over the past uh, 20 years, 20 or 30 years. So initially, when you talk about multicultural writer, it included only writers born from other countries. Okay, multicultural writers means those writers who have come here, but they were born in some other country. So mostly writing in a language other than English. So initially multicultural writers were those writers who have come from different countries and who do not write in English. Later, what happened? It was extended to include second and third generation writers from non-English speaking background. So a person came from different country, he settled here, he started writing. Okay, then he had his children, they also started writing. Okay, they belong to some other country but they wrote here. Okay, so they are the second generation and third generation multicultural writers. Okay, so those who were born in different other countries, okay, uh, uh, and they are writing here, they are multicultural writers. And the initially the quantity, the bulk of these multicultural writers are increasing, and they're becoming more and more debatable and questionable. Okay, writers have emerged from different countries, and they're practicing the genre of short story mainly. Okay, so, and the second and generation writers, although they are born in Australia, but they are the multicultural writers. Maybe they are writing about the Australia issue of Australia, but still they are considered as multicultural writers coming from different countries. Their previous generation, the earlier generation, they have come from different countries. So presently you can see there's an explosion of multicultural writers coming from different countries. They have settled here and they are writing. Okay, like I'll give you some example. um Huh. So, now there's an explosion of these writers, multicultural writers. They have come from different countries. They have settled, and they have multiplied also, and still they write. Okay, and in their writing, they give a lot of value to the differences that they're different in this country. Okay, so and at the same time, they are working against the marginalization. In Australia, they are not they're outsiders, so they are now marginalized. So they are talking about the marginalization. Okay, they are presently they are getting themselves engaged very much in the academics of Australian domain. Okay, but at this point, uh, uh, they are very much curious about their own lives, and they are doing a lot of life writings. Okay, autobiographies. So during this period there are many writers like Sneja Gunyu, Manfred Jurgensen, Lolo Huben, Serge Liberman, George Kannadakis. These are the critics. Okay, these are the major critics who are writing, and they are bringing these multicultural writers to the visibility in the Australian domain. Okay, so these are the writers of ethnic minority backgrounds. Okay, so Ginyu, there's a writer called Ginyu, writes an article, Migrant Women Writers, Who's on Whose Margins. This became very popular article. It was published in 1983. Okay, and the purpose of this essay was to, dismantle the notion of margin. Okay, and Anglo center. Those who are Anglican, those who are British, they feel that they are the center. So this essay, this article was written in order to dismantle the idea about Anglocentrism. Okay, and these authors from ethnic minorities, they examined were women writers were also there. Okay, and women writers, they examine their position in this society. There's a writer called Antigone Kefala, a Greek Romanian writer, Zeni Giles. She's a Zenobia Doratis. Then another writer called Anya Walvis, Polish descent. She comes from Polish background. Then there are many writers like her who are questioning the identity of women in that ethnic minority group in Australia. So these are the early day writers. Okay, and usually these writers show how uh, how what are the ways to interweave the cultural gaps, okay, of women and of migrants and how this weaving includes the testing the limits of language. Okay, and what are the limits of gender? This is the main issue of this initial women from ethnic minority groups. So in this way, you can consider that multicultural writing is very significant. Okay, significant because it has always been the need to communicate with people of same background. Okay, now these ethnic minority groups, they share similar historic experiences. They have the same issue of settlement and adjustments. Okay, and they account their life, and they show the initial efforts that they have made, not only for their livelihood but also for publication of their books. Okay, publication of books or publication of articles in newspaper, journals, and how they were inadequate in their financial support, and they had a lot of problem initially with the developing technological areas. Okay, many other writers, they express that they were afraid, they were scared. Okay, because they were nowadays, if their poetry or a novel that they have read will be accepted or not. Okay, so they had their fears, they had their insecurities, which they have expressed in their literary writings. Okay, and there are many writers who like to express themselves in the language, the native, in their mother tongue, not English. They wanted to express themselves in their mother tongue, and where they could express their feelings with comfortably and with precision. They wanted to experiment with their own native language. So in this way, Australia became a multilingual country. Okay, and most recently, if you see, this second generation and third generation immigrants, um, okay, these multicultural writers, they use English language, okay, as the only means of communication. Just mark, initially when they settled here, many prefer to write in their language because they felt comfortable. They felt that they can express better in their own mother tongue. But gradually, the second and third generation people, they prefer mainly to communicate in English. Okay, and they thought that these writers thought that uh, their subject matter and their theme will be understood, will be read by people of all cultural difference, because English is the standard language for all. So they wanted to be understood, second and third generation writers. So they experimented their writings in English. Okay, so Australian multicultural writers, they reflect diversity in Australia's literary community, and also they express the diversity of Australian culture in general. So, if you look upon the history of multicultural Australia, and if you see the national literature closely, you will find that there is a reflection in Australian immigration since World War II. After World War II, you see a lot of immigration is taking place. Apart from small number of non-Anglo writers, okay, who have come to Australia from different lands, so the first writers they identified as multicultural, they belong to European migrants. Okay. Later many other countries they came, they wrote, but initially European migrants were the one who started the multicultural literature. European migrants groups, they arrived in the country in large numbers in 1940s, 1950s. Okay, they were Greeks, they were Italians, they were Balts, they were Poles, they were Jews. Okay, so they came, and when they wrote, they were the earliest multicultural writers. So Australian literature, you can say it is never different from the experience of the migrants. Okay, in Australian literature, you'll always find an involvement with the migration issues with the migrants. So Australia, from the moment of colonization, okay, when indigenous people were only there, after colonization, it became indigenous and a nation of migrants. Okay, So writers like Sneja Gunu and Cap, this pronunciation is very difficult, and Katerina Longley, they wrote an introduction to the book called Striking Chords Multicultural Literary Interpretations. In their book, they express that, that national literature is composed by variety. There is a variety in national literature also, where the inhabitants of the country, they represent the experience over certain time. Okay, so when Australian literature had not developed their national literature, from that period, many writers they wrote about their experiences. Okay, in that country. Okay, just give me 2 minutes break. I'll be back, and then we'll go to the present condition of multicultural writings. Okay, now I'm back. Now we will see what is the condition of multicultural writing in the present times. Okay, we shall see that, and then we'll move on to the to the multicultural writers, novelists. Now we see that in the contemporary times, when we have already passed colonial impact, okay, more or less, okay, when we have crossed many phases of our existential realities, then now it is time to think that what is now multicultural writing, because people coming from diverse ethnic group, they have already settled, they have already assimilated there. Now what to talk about? Okay, so this multicultural writing is very controversial, and in recent years you will see that there is a silence in this debate, in this controversy, because people have started accepting the diversities. So but if you see from the political point of view, from politics, from political point of view, you will see that although in literature, we have stopped debating that we used to, as much we used to do earlier, but for political people, it's still controversial. Multiculturalism is still very controversial, because policies of multiculturalism, it is under pressure. Okay, and it is going under a lot of drastic political difference in the climate. Okay, the climate of the uh, politics in Australia. So in everyday life of Australian literature, if you see, multiculturalism is quite smooth. Okay, and many more ethnic minority writers are appearing on the scene gradually. Okay, they are transforming the whole national literature. Okay, they've got a lot of contribution in transforming national literature, but multicultural Australian writings, they represent a global within the local. Okay, because they have come from different ethnic group, so they respond to the pressures and the change within Australian society and culture. They go under a transformation process under Australian culture. But global developments such as rapid international communication, travel, post-colonial diasporic literary tradition, transnational popular culture, they are giving a lot of impact on the multicultural writings in Australia, and they have a lot of claim also. Multicultural writers have a lot of claim to be an integral part of Australia's literary heritage. Okay. So you can see that presently, if you read some contemporary Australian novel and literature, you will find presently there is a high rise in the writings of Asian Australian writers. Okay, and it's mainly started from the early 2000s. Okay, and these writers are now coming to the center, who belong to the Asian heritage. Okay, and then there are many who have come from the European world also. They are also writing, but Asian Australian writings are quite high presently. And if you see the contemporary writers, they are now in Australia, they are now responding to the global agenda by exploring issues of representation. They are writing about the outside boundaries of the nation. And in this way they are bringing in new perspectives to the domain of Australian literature. So one of the important consideration, example I can give you, uh, that brings the diverse body of fiction by Asian Australian writers, is that the text resists being commodified as fiction. Okay, so it is not yet commodified. It becomes one of the books which has to be read in terms of um, nationalism, in terms of existence, in terms of identity, but it is not yet been commodified. It is no more it is not a commodity. Okay. So writers like Michelle D. Crester, Melinda Bobbis, Hua Pham, Benjamin Law, Simon Lazaru, Adib Khan, Su Ming Teo, Alice Pung, Ouyang Yu, Nam Li, and Do, Tom Cho. These are all probably Chinese writers in Australia. They have significantly challenged the ideas of race, gender, and sexuality in the transnational space of modern Australia. Transnational means many people of many nationality, people of many cultures, they come and they make Australia melting pot. They're living there. Okay, that is transcultural idea. So now these groups of new writers, they are writing and they are trying to grow the realization. They are trying to enhance the realization that writing does not stop at national or linguistic borders. They are trying to show that literature is not limited to any national borders or linguistic borders. There is no barrier for literature. There is no barrier for expressing one's ideas and beliefs. So now Australia is now moving away from typical that nationalist writing. Okay, now it literature has evolved. Okay, it has expanded. Now they include many other voices also. And this is sometimes called migrant literature. So you can see that all writings except Aboriginal writing is migrants, because British also came here, they explored here, they colonized here, so they are also migrants. So those literature which is not Aboriginal literature is all migrant literature. Okay, that is why the term multiculturalism can be the better way to describe the development in the rewriting of Australian literary history. Okay, so in Australia is now struggling towards its own autonomy in writing. Okay, it wants its own cultural autonomy. Okay, so you have to learn how to accommodate such spectrum of differences and to come into an autonomous state. So it is so diverse, yet it now can be called as an autonomous country, an autonomous nation, a kind of whole on its own. Okay, so when you're reading Australian literature, you have to read it differently from different perspectives through different cultural differences. This is the richness about Australian literature, because that is very much multicultural. Now we will see that who are multicultural novelists in Australia, and then we'll move on to the novel that we have to discuss exclusively. Now, multicultural novelists, you can say that there are waves that came here, multicultural novels. So the first wave of multicultural novel and film was also made later in 1970s and 80s by Australians who visited countries in Asia either as tourists or they had come as professionals. They have come as journalists, they have come as diplomats, they have come as government officials. Okay, so some of them celebrated the examples of many novels. Okay, like there's a person called CJ Koch, Koch. He has written The Year of Living Dangerously. This was published by 1978. Then another writer, Robert Dewey, wrote A Cry in the Jungle Bar. This was published in 1979. Then another writer called Blanche de Alpuget, he wrote a book called Monkeys in the Dark, published in 1980. And then Turtle Beach, published in 1981. This was the first wave initially that came. Second wave of, Australia got a lot of cultural engagement with Asia, and that was marked by the emergence of a group of first generation Asian Australian writers. First generation, remember. So, leading authors, leading novelists are Yasmin Gunaratne, that will be doing now from Sri Lanka, Don O. Kim from Korea, then came Divi Angreni from Indonesia, Satyendra Nandan came from Fiji, Adib Khan from Bangladesh, Arlene Chai from Philippines. Okay, these are the prominent multicultural writers who belong to the second wave of writers of multicultural writers. Then there are many other popular writers who who question the idea of hybridity, who question the idea of personal and national identity. Okay, so these writers are Brian Castro. He has written Birds of Passage in 1983. Stepper was published in 1997. The Bath Fugues, Shanghai Dancing in 2003, Street to Street in 2012, Blindness and Rage in 2017. So Brian Castro's works are a kind of exploding ideas of national identity. It talks about what is center, what is periphery. Okay, then there's another Lebanese Australian novelist, L. Hage. Okay, he wrote The Last Migration in 2002, then The Middle Tree in 2007, One Day in April 2011, and he got very popular for his novels. Another writer called, yes, another writer called Marek Batero. He is Polish Australian writer. Okay, he's a multilingual writer. He also wrote many famous novels like The Slap in 2008. Okay, uh, now there's a these are the very poignant pieces of writings where they are questioning many facets of culture, many facets of life. Okay, so another novel, The Island, was published in 1984 by Antigone Kefala. Abid Khan from Bangladeshi diaspora wrote Spiral Road in 2007. These are very important piece of writings from the Australian domain. Okay. So here, if you see what is multiculturalism, then you will find through these novels that they do not mean same thing in all places or all times. Okay, so multiculturalism here is constructed as a policy which is intimately connected with cultural problems. Okay, which is very specific to migrant settlements. Okay. Now, there are many writers from Asia Pacific also. We saw many Asian writers, but there are many writers from Asia Pacific as well, that we shall discuss, and then we'll go over to today's novel. So, Asia Pacific region is actually limited in Australia's literary past. Okay, so Asia was a subject when it was usually to mark distances and differences. Okay, so there are exceptions, but like the novel The Far Road, which was published in 1962 by George Johnston. Okay, he has written about Chinese Civil War through an Asian journalist eyes. Sorry, Australian journalist eyes. Australian journalist sees Chinese Civil War and he writes a book called The Far Road. So this is about Chinese Civil War, and this remains one of the best of its kinds. Another book, The Year of the Peacock, published in 1965. Now, it is a set of stories which was collaboratively written by Mina Abdullah and Ray Matthew. So this evokes Hindu, Muslim, Indian lives in Australia. Okay, with freshness and dignity. It doesn't talk about fights or violence, but it talks about friendship. It talks about brotherhood. Okay, it talks about togetherness. So generally, Asia and Asians have been, they have been demonized in Australian writing usually. Uh, but this kind of writing, they give a good view, a human view to the Indian people. Now I'll narrow down to Sri Lankan writers, diasporic writers. Okay, now we'll discuss in detail Sri Lankan diasporic writer like Yasmin Gunaratne. She is one of the most outstanding women writers of Sri Lankan diaspora. Okay. Now we shall see how Yasmin Gunaratne, within the body of work, how she produced, woman writings in the Sri Lankan diaspora. Okay, we will see the major part of Sri Lankan literature was specially written in Sinhalese language. Okay, Sinhala or Sinhalese language, but there is also a considerable number of works in other languages also, in other Sri Lankan language. Okay, including Pali, Tamil, and English. Okay, and if you see Sri Lanka is a highly educated country where about 91.9% people are educated. Okay, and Sri Lanka has got a long story of storytelling tradition. Okay, so they are also people of literary taste. Now, what is special about literature in Sri Lanka is that is the extent to which the oral tradition, they pass on a lot of oral tradition uh, that comprises of the vast body of literature spanning many genres in written form. Okay, so they have a long history of oral tradition, which took years to make it down to to the writing forms. So you know Jataka stories. So the influence of Jataka stories, which is the narratives of the past lives of Siddharth Gautam, that has been powerful to such an extent that both prose and poetry in the country have drawn heavily from Buddhist parables. Parables, stories, fables related to Buddha. Okay, to Lord Buddha. So Sri Lanka is blessed with rich reservoir of narratives, and it is usually written, and also they are in oral traditions as well. Okay, and these people, Sri Lankan people, they accept very much these narratives, of the past days. And if you see in recent times, events and processes of human impact has been taken place. 3 decade long they had a long conflict in their island. Okay, and this conflict have given expression also in their literary works in all languages. So they found some perspectives to be represented in their novels. Okay, which comprises of their long conflicts within the country, within the island. So Sri Lankan writing in English, it flourished in the 1980s only, so late. Okay, so English is a dominant language in their country, but it has not acquired a good place of respectability and acceptance in the literature. They write mainly in their Sinhalese language. So for them, English is still considered to be the language of the elite. Just like our country, they also believe that it is the language of the elite, and it is insufficient in literary nuances to depict the indigenous experience typical to the land of Sri Lanka. So, in this essay, Sri Lankan Literature in English, the writer Rajiva Vijay Sinha, he writes that immediately after the independence of Sri Lanka, there was a downgrading of those few who had in fact written in English in the early years of the century. So, those who were very good writers of English, they gradually downgraded. They were seen as being anti national. People thought that those who are writing in English are anti-national people. So the English writers were disregarded. That is why many people did not wish to write in English language, because they believed writing in English was anti-national. They preferred more to write in their language, that is Sinhalese. Now we will see few Sri Lankan women writers. In 1928, there's a writer called Rosalind Mendes. She became the first woman from Sri Lanka to write a novel. Okay, she has written her first novel, The Mystery of a Tragedy, and with this, she becomes the first woman to write a novel. Okay, so after that, there was quite high rise in the writing and publication of novels, but Rosalind Mendes was the first novelist in the Sri Lankan domain. Then came Vijita Yappa. Now she's also a popular publisher of English language books in Sri Lanka. Okay, and she finds that new generation of women writers are exploring social issues. They're writing novels. These women are writing short stories. They're writing dramas. They're writing poems also. Okay, so slowly, slowly they see that there is a rise in the writings of Sri Lankan writers, and mainly women writers are coming up. Then this is a very famous writer, Sunetra Raja Karuna Naike. Okay, she's a prolific, award-winning, bilingual writer. She's a translator as well. Okay, then there are many other writers who followed the suit. That like there's a poet called Eva Ranavira. Okay, then Punya Kanti Vijay Naike. She is also one of the foremost novelist and story writer. Then Kumari Jayawardena. Okay, so she's a pioneering feminist writer from Sri Lanka. Then Neera Konjit Vikramasinghe. She is a popular writer of novels such as Sweet Savage Love and Dark Fires. Okay, so many writers, many women writers came into existence since then. Now, who are the women writers from Sri Lankan diaspora? So, diasporic writers in Australia, there were many diasporic writers in Australia, and these writers, Sri Lankan writers, they usually reject the writings of the diaspora writers. Okay, they find it faulty and superficial. They do not like. But women writers from the global Sri Lankan diaspora who represent Sinhalese, Tamil, and Burgher ethnicities, they have made significant contribution to literature. English is not that much encouraged yet in Sri Lanka. Okay, so writers like Yasmin Gunaratne, she won Sri Lankan Australian Writer Award. Okay, and there is another writer called Dharini Abe Sekara. She's Sri Lankan American writer. Then Naomi Munavira, Sri Lankan American writer. She's artist also. Then Lee Lakshmi Pibsna. She is Samar Sinha. She is Sri Lankan Canadian writer. Then Seni Viratne. She is Sri Lankan British writer. Adani Uthay Kumar. She is Canadian born Sri Lankan writer. Then Chandini Lokuge. She is Sri Lankan Australian author. So these are the Sri Lankan diasporic writers, those who wrote. Okay, those who wrote very substantially and those who are famous even till today. Now we will go over to our specific work, Yasmin Gunaratne's Change of Skies. Now, Gunaratne was born in 1935 and she is still alive. She is a very famous novelist, poet, essayist, academic, biographer, literary critic, and bibliographer as well. Okay, she was born in Sri Lanka in 1935 to a Sri Lankan father and mother from Trinidad. Okay, she got her education in Colombo and University of Ceylon, Peradeniya. Okay, and she obtained first class in honors degree in English in 1959. Okay, and when she got first class, she got scholarship in Cambridge University also. From she received her doctorate in 1962. So she is doctor. Her doctoral research was on the development of English language literature of Ceylon between 1815 and the end of 1870s. Then she came back again from Cambridge to her own nation. There she taught for 10 years. Then again she moved away to Australia in 1972, where she took a position of senior lecturer in English in a university called Macquarie, okay, in New South Wales. Now, from here, she got lots of name, fame, and she got many awards also for her writing career. Okay. Now let's see what this novel talks about. A change of skies. Okay, we'll see. Now, this young Sri Lankan, there's a character here, young Sri Lankan academic called Bharat Mangla Devasina. He, along with his wife named Nava Ranjani, okay, later she was called Barry, and they were called Barry and Jean in Australia. They were Bharat Mangla Devasina and Nava Ranjani, but when they went to Australia, they changed their names to Barry and Jean in Australia. They migrate to Australia to pick up some short-term assignments in the South Cross University. Okay, they wanted some short-term assignment. For that, they both husband and wife moved to South Cross University. So, if you read the novel, you will see it simultaneously follows the journey of Bharat, or who, AKA became Barry's grandfather to Australia in the late 19th century. So you can see there are lots of parallels in between Bharat or Barry's grandfather. So both of them journey is very difficult till the very end, and it ends very differently. Now Edward is the grandfather. He realized that though this has been a tremendous learning experience, his true home lays back in Sri Lanka. Okay, to which he ultimately returns to marry a lady called Emily, and he wants to establish a household to take on the duties and responsibilities of an inherited culture. He goes back to his homeland and marries. So, in his diary, he writes, I have seen enough. He notes in his diary, and learned enough of myself too to understand that a life served here is not for me. So, in Australia, he says, no, this life is not for me. I should go back. Okay. On the other hand, if you see Bharat and Navaranjani, okay, now these are the youth, these are the mass immigrants, uh, the recent immigrants. They are now taken on the Australian friendly names of Barry and Jean Mundi. They changed their name. They name themselves as Barry and Jean Mundi. They have gone for some short term assignments in the university there, but now they decide to stay on in Australia, and they want to make Australia their home despite being subjected initially to local prejudice. There was little prejudice, maybe a kind of racism as well, uh, okay, against immigrants from Asia. So in early years in Australia, they try to maintain their Sri Lankan identity. Okay, but they are open to Australian culture. But later, as years pass on, in the process of happily meeting the challenges of necessary assimilation, okay, they soon settle down in the new land, developing a sense of place and rootedness in their adaptive culture. In this host culture, they try to develop a kind of rootedness in the new country. So it appears that in this new globalized world order, it is easier for them to accept Australian culture, okay, than it was for the grandfather, Edward, okay, a century earlier. So the decision to come to Australia, uh, and they wanted to become Australian citizens, okay, it is finally the idea becomes fruitful by tremendous political disturbance that overtakes Sri Lanka. Simultaneously, in Sri Lanka, they see a lot of political disturbance. So, who will go back to that country with so much of civil war and so much of political disturbance? They finally thought that this is a peaceful place to settle themselves. So they are put off by the meaningless violence that now prevails there. They are no more um, concerned with the violence that is going on in Sri Lanka. Okay. So now what is happening during disturbances in Sri Lanka, they find out that there is a lot of class gap is now visible. Means now they are becoming prosperous and wealthier, whereas the people in back in Australia they are becoming downtrodden and poor because of so much of disturbances. Now they decide that no, Australia is a good place, is a comfortable place to live in. Okay, and they don't want to get back from Australia to the disturbed country, Sri Lanka. Okay, so they say that um, that they want to settle. They're expressing their wish that they want to settle here, and you know they want to work here, but settle here. So they have this. They continuously getting news from Sri Lanka, and how it is now a disturbed country. So there what happens, they work in the university, and Jean, she writes a cookery book of Sri Lankan dishes for Australian people. Now at the end, when the novel closes, with Edwina is the name of the daughter. She is accepting both her Australian identity and her Sri Lankan origin. She becomes a truly global citizen of the world, because uh, if when globalization took place, they believed that there is no boundary, there is no thing called home. Home is a very abstract term. So this was exactly believed by Edwina. She became quite a global citizen. Okay, and she continuously made a trip to Sri Lanka. She pursued in economics her studies, and for her project she continuously went and came back from Australia to Sri Lanka. So she connected herself from her origin country, whereas these her parents Barry and Jean, they tried to assimilate there uh, in Australia. So this kind of identity and belongingness is very prominent in the novel. Okay, and it clearly shows that you are neither totally forgotten, nor you are treated here uncritically. So in the host nation, there is politics of assimilation, where the early settlers in that place, they are quite prejudiced, and where they look down upon you. So there is politics involved here, and the country that you have left, there is also a lot of political disturbances. So you are never deprived of these situations. Okay, so it is also evident in the novel that although this new couple tries to settle a new home, okay, they try to accept both the cultures. Okay, and they want to stay happy in this new cultural setting of Australia, but still this is the result of some kind of physical displacement, and this leads to the development of new perspectives, which makes immigrants look back critically on the nation that they left behind. Okay, the nation, they're little critical about their own native country, where there's a lot of chaos, where a lot of disturbances, okay, a lot of imbalances, inequalities. So this again adds on to the experience, like where to go, what to do. Okay, so the experience of embracing new nation has the potential effect on both distancing the self from the nation and being sensitive to the values that they have left behind. Okay, so the issue of identity and belongingness is more prominent here. It is important here in the writings of diaspora, where you are completely disillusioned, where you see that the country that you left is no more a peaceful country, but here you have issues with settlement. So there is always a kind of flux within the uh, identity of the immigrant. Okay, so this is an important issue in the diaspora. So you will find in the novel that though they are never uh, allowed to think back about their nation, but still they're never allowed to be of a tragic existence, but still they are uprooted as if from their cultures, and they try very hard to settle down here. So Navaranjani and Bharat move to Australia. It makes them take the Australian name Jean and Barry. Okay, without they try to quickly adapt the new names without any heartburn, though at the core change of name is a very big issue with regard to the change of the identity. Okay, so this is a very critical issue with regard to the diasporic identities. Okay. So this was all about this novel and the problems with with migration, and in the present context when you're talking about diaspora, when we are talking about the crisis in the identity, a very subtle, very delicate issue it is when you're talking about identity. And that is why it is the name has been very appropriately given as a change of skies. Okay. So change of skies here, it deals with certain significant issues related to migrant identity, where the sky changes, where there's an Sri Lankan sky and you have moved on to the sky of Australia. Okay, so here author has tried to fuse two stories spanning from 2 centuries, spanning to relating to two continents. It talks about two generations. Okay, so the story of Edward the grandfather and then the grandchild Bharat. Okay, the grandson, they run simultaneously. Okay, so the novel deals with the theme of cultural conflicts found in the first and the latest wave of migration. So first the grandfather went. Okay, conflict in migration he had. Similarly, the first, this is the third one again, moving running to Australia for a better life. Okay, so what is his cultural conflict after a decade, that is also represented here. It runs parallel, grandfather's and grandson's story. So the expatriate experience of these characters, along with Nava Ranjani, who is Bharat's wife, they give the example of themes of acceptance and willingness. Okay, that Gunaratne herself seems to have practiced in her actual life. She has practiced acceptance and willingness in a host nation. That is given here. Her own experience is represented here in the novel. So the author has claimed that she was inspired to write the novel by the Asian immigration debate and a rash of anti-Asian graffiti. People, they did not prefer Asian people in their country. Okay, so there was a lot of upsurge there. So Gunaratne, responds to that kind of upsurge through this novel. So this novel deals with adventures that are very much dependent upon immigration. It is an account of the moving in time and space. Okay, where the past century is juxtaposed by the present period. So, change of skies comprises elements of biography, autobiography, newspaper report. Okay, so many things here add up to form a novel called A Change of Skies. So the author here takes the readers to several trips to academic institutions. She takes us to different institutions. She takes us to radio stations, restaurants in Australia. Okay, where one finds elaborate account of society not in Australia but in Sri Lanka as well. Okay, so the characters here parallelly see Australia and their own left out nation, that is Sri Lanka. So this also um, gives a kind of homage to the events at home in Sri Lanka that cast the dark shadows on the lives of the people living here in Australia. When Sri Lanka was going through a lot of disturbances, okay, the same thing, same feeling was felt by the people here in Australia, by the Sri Lankan people living here in Australia. They also had a bad feeling about such kind of disturbances in their country. Okay, so here the protagonists are two, Bharat and Navaranjani. Both of them are protagonists. Both of them are immigrants. Okay, now who leave their homeland Sri Lanka and they migrate to Australia. Okay. So, but well, when they are coming, they have run away from their homes. They have come to this place, but still they are having a wide sense of nationality. Okay, uh, uh, with regard to their country, with regard to Sri Lanka. Okay, and they, here when they arrive Australia, they want to preserve their self-esteem in their new country. It also alienates them initially from the emergent continental nation of Australia, where they find themselves. Okay, so they try to settle in here with a lot of sense of attachment towards their own nation, and they somehow want to assimilate here in order to have a peaceful life with a better lifestyle and a pleasant life. Okay, whereas in their country they were having a lot of political different disturbances and chaos. Okay, so with this, today we come to an end with a multicultural. It was a broad aspect. We come to an end, and I, give an example also. Through this novel, we understood how this multicultural um, writing takes place, where person comes from different country and settles here. Okay, and talks about his own culture, his or her own culture, which he or she wants to mix it up here with the Sri Lanka, with the Australian culture. Okay, so tomorrow we will deal with contemporary novels. Presently, what are the novels which are getting a lot of acclaim? We'll go through those novels tomorrow, and with that, I'll be ending my this semester's teaching. So, with this, I come to an end with today's class. Dear learners, for today, I go offline. I hope you understood whatever I explained. So, for today, I sign off. Have good time.